Hey guys, tonight we're slipping through the velvet curtains of Tudor England. The gilded trap where power, scandal and seduction brush elbows under flickering candlelight. If you've ever thought navigating modern relationships is tricky, imagine a place where one glance from the king can rewrite your entire life or end it. Welcome to the forgotten lives of royal mistresses. These women were whispered about in corridors, painted over in family portraits, and often erased from the official story. But make no mistake, they were there in the shadows manipulating the game as much as they were played. And just so we're clear, you probably won't survive this. Not with your head anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me what city you're in and what time it is as you're watching this. I love knowing who else is wandering the Tudor halls with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey of horror together. You step into a world where the air always smells faintly of rosewater and political anxiety. The year is sometime in the early 1500s, and you're standing just outside the court of Henry VIII. You're not anyone special yet, but you're well born enough to be allowed inside the palace, close enough to taste the ambition on everyone's breath. The halls are crowded with silks and jewels and murmured flattery. Courtiers float past you like richly dressed ghosts. There are men with curled beards and feathered caps, and women whose gowns are so wide they could knock over a small army if they turn too fast. The court at first glance is a carnival of elegance, but spend even 5 minutes listening instead of looking and you'll hear it. The sharp edge under every compliment, the performance in every laugh. Here, every person is both an actor and an audience. Everyone wants something: favour, advancement, protection. And nothing is more valuable than the king's gaze. When Henry VIII walks into a room, you feel it before you see him. The atmosphere shifts, conversation dies for a beat, like the world holding its breath. Henry isn't just a man. He's a golden sun around which everyone else orbits, whether they want to or not. And if that sun happens to rest its light a little longer on one woman, well, things start happening. She'll be seated closer at banquets, dressed a little finer, and given a locket with a small carved H. Soon the rumours start. Have you heard about Lady So-and-so? The murmurs travel fast, faster than any horse or pigeon ever could, and if the rumours are true, that woman may soon find herself holding power far beyond what she ever imagined, at a steep cost. Mistresses aren't just lovers, they're walking time bombs. Their elevation is a threat to every political faction at court, to the Queen, and to rival noble houses. And while they may receive gifts, land, jewels and servants, they're also always one misstep away from ruin. The king's affection is warm and intoxicating, yes, but also famously brief. When it cools, so does everyone else's. You walk through the garden paths where these liaisons often begin. Half instinct, half strategy. The hedges are high, privacy arranged like a chessboard. Young women brought to court as maids of honour are warned subtly by their mothers. Be charming, but not too charming. Catch the king's eye, but don't keep it too long. It's a game with no rule book, only consequences. One of the strangest quirks of Tudor mistress. Everyone knows, but no one says it out loud. There's no official title for the king's current favourite. No crown, no seat in Parliament. You're not a queen, but you wield the king's ear. and with that comes real terrifying influence. Yet it's not all drama and diamonds. In the quieter hours late at night, behind embroidered curtains, the women who hold these roles sit alone, wondering how long their favour will last, wondering what the Queen thinks, wondering what comes next. For every Annalyn who rose, there were dozens who fell silently and without ceremony. And let's not forget the less glamorous side of it. Being the king's mistress often meant being the target of venomous gossip. You might find yourself painted as a homewrecker in court poetry, mocked in anonymous pamphlets. Your family might gain favour or be punished with you if you fall from grace. In some cases, the price is even higher. Prison, banishment, or worse. But despite the risks, young women still angled for that gaze. Why? Because for many it was one of the few ways to change their fate. Marriage in noble England was rarely about love. Weren't a firstborn son or the heir to something enormous. Your future was basically arranged at birth. But catch the king's attention. You could leapfrog past all that. You might even become a duchess, or for the boldest, a queen. And that's the academic debate still simmering under the surface. Were these mistresses victims of a predatory system, or agents navigating it with eyes wide open? Some scholars argue that the court was a gilded cage that used beauty and charm as bait. Others insist that these women were deeply strategic, choosing flirtation as a weapon. As usual, the truth is probably somewhere messier in the middle. Tonight, you're not just reading about these women, you're stepping into their slippers. You're walking with them through gardens, laughing carefully at the king's jokes, hiding letters behind tapestries. You're standing at windows with trembling hands, waiting to see if that knock means danger or another night of whispered power. So settle in. This isn't a fairy tale, but it's not quite a tragedy either. It's something in between, something very human. And tomorrow morning, when you brush your teeth or scroll your phone, you might just feel a little ghost of velvet under your fingertips. You hear her name whispered first in the presence chamber, tucked between an offhand joke and a sip of claret. Elizabeth Blount, Bessie they call her. In the intimate way, courtiers refer to someone they all think they know, but none can really claim. You follow the conversation like a stray scent through the palace corridors until you catch the full story, or at least the version that survives the retelling. She wasn't the most beautiful girl at court, they say, but there was something about her. A glow, a softness that belied sharp intuition. And most importantly, she was the first publicly known mistress of Henry VIII. It starts simply enough. You're in the early 1510s now, and the court is still fresh-faced. Henry is young, barely 20, athletic, with that burning Plantagenet energy that hasn't yet turned to paranoia or gout. He's newly married to Catherine of Aragon, and though the political alliance is sound, there's one glaring issue. No surviving male heir. Enter Bessie, a 17-year-old maid of honour to the Queen. Charming, quick-witted, and skilled at dancing. That last part matters more than you'd think. The court dances are no casual pastime. They're an audition. Every step, every twirl is a performance of grace, fertility, and obedience. You see Bessie on the floor, eyes trained carefully ahead, but always aware of who's watching. Henry notices, and once he notices, things unfold in the way they always do. Small tokens exchanged, quiet conversations behind heiresses' curtains, a growing tension that soon makes its way into the gossip loops. What's curious is that Bessie doesn't fall into scandal. Not immediately. and no dramatic upheaval, no duels, no public denouncements. She fades into the role of royal favourite as if it were simply the next stage in her duties. And when she becomes pregnant, yes, with the king's child, there's no major public outcry. Why? Because of what happens next. In 1519, Bessie gives birth to a son, and not just any son, Henry Fitzroy, the king's first acknowledged illegitimate child. You can almost hear the gasp that runs through the Tuda nobility. Henry VIII, obsessed with legacy and virility, now as undeniable proof that he can sire a healthy male child. The problem must be Catherine, the whispers say, and this changes everything. Fitzroy is a curly-headed symbol of hope, a living embodiment of what the Tudor line could be if only a legitimate son would arrive. Henry is so proud, so thunderously smug about it, that he showers titles on the boy, Duke of Richmond and Somerset. You watch, wide-eyed, as a bastard child is lifted almost to the level of a prince. For a moment the rules seem different. And what of Bessie? For her part, she doesn't claw for more. That's what makes her unusual. While later mistresses will scheme for elevation for crowns, Bessie plays the long game by stepping back. She's quietly married off to a respectable nobleman, Gilbert Taleboys, and lives a life of native peace. She vanishes from the court's inner circle before the tides can turn against her. It makes you wonder, was that her choice or someone else's plan? Historians still debate this. Some say she was simply a girl who got lucky, caught the king's eye, and wisely retired once the favour cooled. Others believe she was nudged aside by ambitious families eager to place more strategic daughters in the royal path. Either way, Bessie escapes the fate of so many women who get too close to the throne. Disgrace, trial, and sometimes execution. But let's take a moment to appreciate a strange little twist. Bessie Blount's son Fitzroy was at one point seriously considered as a possible heir to the throne. There were real discussions among Henry's advisors about legitimising him in a different timeline, one nudge of fate away. You might have seen a King Henry IX born not of a queen, but a mistress. Fitzroy even had his own court, tutors and military training. But of course his story ends too soon. He dies at 17, probably of tuberculosis, and with him vanishes the closest thing Henry ever had to a male successor during his lifetime. You look back at Bessie with new eyes now, not as a footnote, not as a side character, but as a pivotal figure, the first mistress, the one who bore a prince in everything but aim. Her story reminds you that power doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers it and walks away quietly. But here's a fun footnote that rarely makes the textbooks. It said Bessie once danced a series of courtly masks themed around fortune and fame right before catching the king's eye. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the tutors really were just that theatrical. Now, let's talk about the ghost in the room, the Queen. Catherine of Aragon, for all her devoutness and dignity, knew, of course she did. But what could she do? In Tudor England, a queen's power wasn't in protest. It was in how she carried herself despite betrayal. Catherine doesn't rage publicly. Instead, she doubles down on piety, loyalty, and subtle performances of stoicism. You wonder what she really thought of Bessie. Did she pity her, hate her, or dismiss her? That silence too is part of the story. What makes Bessie's story so compelling is that we forget her so easily. She isn't Anne Boleyn. She doesn't rise to a crown or fall to an axe. She isn't the face of the Protestant Reformation. She's just Bessie, sweet-faced, smart, and sharp enough to step out before things got messy. She wins the king's attention, bears his son, and walks away with her head and reputation intact. In this blood-soaked drama of Tudor love and politics, that's practically a miracle. And here's the irony. In doing so little, she changes so much. She sets the precedent. She proves that mistresses aren't just distractions, they're players. And every woman who comes after her knows what's now possible and what it might cost. You learn quickly that in Tudor England, no one arrives at court by accident, especially not the women. Behind every embroidered bodice and careful smile is a training regimen that would make a modern royal finishing school look like summer camp. From the moment a noble girl takes her first shaky steps on a marble floor, she's being shaped into something useful, graceful, silent, and, when needed, dazzling when required, and above all, valuable. Tonight you step into that world, the polished upbringing of girls destined not just to serve, but to be noticed. You're inside a drafty manor house somewhere in the countryside. The air smells like beeswax and damp wool, and everything echoes a bit too much. Here, a young girl named Margaret, let's call her that, though her name isn't what matters, has just turned 6. Her governess is already correcting the way she curtsies. "No, your hand must be soft like velvet," she murmurs, gently repositioning Margaret's fingers. It's not just about etiquette, it's choreography for survival. By 10, Margaret is learning to dance with a book balanced on her head. She can recite psalms in Latin and knows how to pass a goblet without spilling. More importantly, she's starting to understand court dynamics. The way her mother hushes when writing letters. The way her father's mood shifts depending on whose seal is stamped at the bottom. No one tells her directly, but the message is clear. Your body is a vessel for your family's ambition. She's being trained for the royal court. Yes, but more specifically for proximity. Proximity to queens, proximity to kings, proximity to opportunity. Mistresses don't just appear beside the throne. They're cultivated, wrapped in layers of pedigree and polish. The goal isn't necessarily to become one, but if the stars align, you'll be ready. At 14, Margaret arrives at court, freshly perfumed and trembling in satin slippers. She's now officially a maid of honour, which is both a privilege and a meat grinder. The Queen, whichever one it happens to be at the time, has a glittering entourage of these young women. Their job is to accompany her, flatter her, sing when asked, dance when summoned, and pretend not to see what they inevitably will see. Affairs, power plays, poisonous alliances, but always with a smile. Being a maid of honour is the tutor equivalent of walking into a lion's den wearing perfume made of steak. You're always being watched not just by the king, but by the other courtiers, the foreign ambassadors, and the older ladies whose job is to monitor you like hawks in velvet. There's intense pressure to sparkle but never outshine. Be witty but never clever enough to threaten. You learn to speak in elegant riddles, to blush on cue, and to cry just enough at a tragic ballad without smudging your coal. And then of course you learn how to flirt without flirting. This is an art form and it's not optional. A glance that lingers a half-second longer. A subtle adjustment of your sleeve to reveal a sliver of wrist. A curtsy held just a bit deeper when the king walks past. You're coached in these things by older women who've seen it all, and by men who pretend not to be watching, though they absolutely are. Here's the kicker. None of this means you want to be the king's mistress. But if you are, it better be on your terms. The court is filled with cautionary tales. Girls who rose too fast and crashed even faster. Girls who misunderstood a smile and have found themselves compromised. Girls who said no at the wrong time and disappeared into unwanted marriages or quiet obscurity. There's a fringe detail here, almost laughable in its absurdity. Some noble families would position their daughters to be noticed, not for scandal exactly, but for favour. A daughter in the king's graces might mean a grant of land, a title for a brother, or a cushy appointment for a father. One of the more notorious cases involved a family dressing their daughter in foreign silks, rare and scandalously sheer, just for a single royal hunt. She was paraded like a rare falcon, and yes, she got noticed. Did she want to? That's harder to say. The real tragedy is her. The line between preparation and exploitation was thin as lace. Were these girls empowered or manipulated? Modern historians argue both sides. Some insist these young women were pawns traded for influence like jewelled game pieces. Others claim they were agents of their own destiny, flirting with power in a world where marriage was a trap and love, a luxury. You watch Margaret learn to walk that tightrope. She grows sharper, funnier, and more aware of what she's doing and why. She learns that attention can be used like currency, spent carefully, hoarded or weaponized. And then one day, it happens. Margaret catches the king's eye. She's not even sure how. Maybe it was the song she sang at the Winter Masque. Maybe the deep green of her gown reminded him of something or someone. But suddenly he pauses when she speaks and smiles when she curtsies. His gaze lingers, her breath quickens, not with excitement, but with the calculation, because now the game has changed. Her friends see it too. Some are envious, others wary. The Queen says nothing, but the flicker in her eyes during dinner is unmistakable. Margaret is invited to more events and given a better seat at the hunt. A small gold ring appears on her pillow with no note. Everyone knows what this means, and yet no one says it aloud. This is how it begins, not with fireworks, but with subtle shifts in attention. The training, the years of instruction, all converging on this moment, and she has to ask herself, is this what I want? Can I control thee? There's one final twist that sticks with you as you drift back from Margaret's world into your own. Many of these girls were taught from birth to suppress their instincts, to perform virtue and innocence, and then one day they're expected to pivot, to use seduction as a survival tool, and if they fail they are discarded as if the script was never theirs to begin with. So as you lie back and think about Tudor mistresses, remember before they were lovers, they were learners forged in the fires of discipline, ambition and silent games. And they played their parts as best they could, often with no idea what act would come next. You're standing in the centre of Whitehall Palace, watching history start to buckle and shudder like a timbered roof in a storm. And it's all because of two sisters, not royalty, not even nobles of the highest rank. Just two well-placed, well-timed, and, depending on who's talking, dangerously ambitious daughters of the Berlin family. Tonight, you move from Bessie Blount's gentle rise to the Berlin sisters' dizzying ascent, and you're about to find out how tangled, glamorous and downright cutthroat things get when ambition runs in the family. It's hard to overstate what a powder keg the bin's lit just by being there. Sir Thomas Boleyn, their father, was a diplomat with an impressive gift for survival, and their mother, Elizabeth Howard, came from one of the most ancient noble families in England. The girls, Mary and Anne, grew up in privilege, but not the kind that guarantees crowns. No one looked at the Berlin sisters at age 10 and thought, ah, yes, future threats to the monarchy. But that's exactly what they became. First up, Mary. You meet her in 1520, fresh back from the glittering court of France, where she supposedly learnt a few things about charm, subtlety, and the art of conversation with men who could end your family line on a whim. She arrives at Henry VII's court with flushed cheeks, a musical laugh, and no idea she's about to become the king's mistress, or maybe she does. That's part of the mystery. Mary Boleyn doesn't write letters filled with clever schemes or revolutionary declarations. She just shows up, says all the right things, and boom, Henry notices. Suddenly she's dining at the king's table. She's riding in the same hunts. She's mentioned in court poems with coded flattery. And of course, Liebe. She vanishes from the historical spotlight just as quickly as she entered. But not before 2 children are born, Catherine and Henry. And here's where the real scholarly wrestling match begins. Some historians believe Henry VIII fathered one or both of Mary's children. Others insist it was her husband, William Carey, a gentleman of the Privy Chamber. There are no definitive answers, just the quiet, gnawing possibility that Henry VIII may have had not 1 but 2 illegitimate children with Mary and left both unacknowledged. And then comes Anne. She enters like a match tossed into the dry brushwood. Not traditionally beautiful, at least not by Tudor standards, but magnetic in the way women who know their own mind often are. Sharp eyes, sharper wit. She doesn't charm with a sweetness like Mary. She entrances with mystery, intellect, and the ability to say no like it's a spell. When Anne arrives at court, she's already learnt from her sister's experience. She knows what happens when a girl says yes too soon, so she doesn't. Henry's used to getting what he wants, and Anne says no again and again, politely, flirtatiously, maddeningly. It drives him absolutely wild. What begins as a casual flirtation warps into obsession. He writes her letters, steamy, emotional, embarrassingly earnest letters, begging her to be his. And here's the thing, Annie doesn't want to be just another mistress. She wants security. She wants influence. She wants more. Maybe even a crown. For the first time, you see a royal mistress shape not just the king's heart, but the policies of a nation. Anne's presence begins to infect everything. Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, his relationship with Rome, and the stability of the entire kingdom. Whispers turn to roars. Parliament stirs. The Pope refuses to grant a divorce. Anne holds her ground. It's no longer just a love affair. It's a national crisis. While all this unfolds, you have to imagine Mary watching from the sidelines. She's married again now to a man far below her in status, and she's quietly falling out of favour while her sister rises like a storm cloud. There's real tension between them. Some accounts suggest jealousy, others imply pity. One sister plays the game by the rules and loses. The other breaks the game entirely and rewrites the board. Eventually Anne becomes queen. You already know how this ends. Heads and axes and treason trials. But tonight, we're not there yet. We're still in the firework moment when Anne Boleyn, former lady-in-waiting, former flirtation and former mistress, is now England's crowned queen. It's unprecedented, terrifying, and a bold leap across class and gender lines. But she didn't get there alone. Here's a fringe fact that rarely makes it into the soap opera versions. Anne had a network. Her mother, her brother George, reformist allies, and even foreign ambassadors helped construct the scaffolding of her rise. She wasn't just navigating court politics, she was practically orchestrating them. And in that way, the Bin sisters weren't just figures in a romance. They were architects of a seismic shift, and scholars still can't agree on what to do with that. Was Anne a proto-feminist icon wielding her agency in a world built to strip it away? Or was she a master manipulator, who used desire as a lever and toppled an entire nation into religious and political chaos. Again, the answer slips through your fingers, changing shape depending on who you ask. Maybe that's what makes her so unforgettable for you. Standing in the echo of it all, it's the duality of the Berlin sisters that sticks. Mary, who gave the king what he wanted and was discarded. Anne, who denied him and was crowned only to fall even harder. Two sisters, two approaches, same king, same court, completely different fates. And in the rush of silk and scandal you start to see a pattern emerge, one that future mistresses will try to follow or avoid. Say yes too early and you disappear, say no too long and you risk everything, but if you time it just right, you might change the world. You walk with Mary Boleyn now. Not the legendary Anne's sister, not the one written off in the margins, but Mary herself and the quiet shadow. She never really escaped. Everyone knows her name, of course. It's always paired with Anne's, always second, always the other Berlin girl. But tonight, you press in closer past the simplifications and find a woman who lived the full Tudor experience. Adored, discarded, married, widowed, remarried, and always underestimated. When you first meet Mary, she's laughing. Not the nervous, high-pitched giggle of a court girl trying to charm her way through a tense moment, but something deeper, freer. She's in France then, part of Queen Mary Tudor's entourage on her brief, ill-fated marriage to Louis XII. And while the Queen's life turns bitter quickly, Mary finds something entirely different. Education, experience, possibly even scandal. The French court is decadent and loose with its affections. People still whisper that Mary became the mistress of the new king, France I, while she was there. He allegedly called her his English mare, which, yeah, is as gross and sexist as it sounds. Whether true or not, by the time Mary returns to England, she's already worn the label of experienced, and that doesn't fade easily in Tudor society. So, when she enters the English court again, people look at her with suspicion and a touch of judgment. But that doesn't stop Henry VII from noticing her. Their affair begins discreetly. You imagine her at a court masque, candlelight flickering against her chestnut hair, her eyes catching the king's across the crowd. A few dances, a private dinner, and then before long she's elevated. Mary is now the king's mistress. Her family rises with her, basking in the warmth of royal attention. For the Berryns, it's a promising start. For Mary, it's a trap. The thing about being the king's mistress, especially in the early 1520s, is that there's no script for what happens next. You don't get a title, you don't get an estate, you get rumours, you get the occasional gift, a flattering mention in court poetry, maybe even a small portrait. But more often than not you get forgotten, and Mary is no exception. Before long, Henry grows bored, or maybe distracted. He moves on. Mary, like so many before her, is married off to William Carey, a respectable courtier with enough status to make the whole thing look polished. The wedding happens quickly, no fanfare, the message is clear, she served her purpose. But here's where things get complicated. Mary gives birth to two children, Catherine in 1524 and Henry in 1526. The timing lines up just a little too neatly with her affair with the king, and while Henry VIII never acknowledges either child as his own, whispers fly through the court. Did he have two illegitimate children with Mary Boleyn? Is little Henry Carey actually a royal bastard hidden in plain sight? Historians still did argue over this. There's no firm proof, just a cluster of circumstantial evidence, and that delicious Tudor ambiguity. What is known is that both children go on to live interesting lives. Catherine becomes a lady-in-waiting. Henry Carey ends up as Baron Hunsdon and is showered with favour under Queen Elizabeth I, his possible cousin or half-sister, depending on which theory you believe. Either way, Mary's children stay close to the crown even if their mother does not. Because while Anne is ascending like a flame, Mary is slipping into silence. Her husband, William Carey, dies suddenly of sweating sickness in 1528, and Mary, now a widow with 2 children and very little money, is forced to ask her powerful family for help. Anne, not yet queen but firmly in Henry's favour, agrees to support her. But there's tension now, sharp and unmistakable. Mary is becoming convenient. She's no longer useful. Worse, she's unpredictable. And then she does something truly unforgivable by TUDA standards. She falls in love, not with a noble, not with a foreign diplomat, but with a soldier, William Stafford, a nobody in the eyes of the court, a man with no lands, no title and no political value. And Mary marries him in secret. When the Binns find out, they're furious. Anne, now the soon-to-be queen, is humiliated. The family cuts Mary off entirely. She's banished from court, exiled not for scandal. She's already been a royal mistress, but for marrying without permission, without strategy, without gain. It's one of the most quietly radical acts in Tudor history. Mary Boleyn, once mistress to the most powerful man in the realm, walks away from all of it to marry for love, and she pays for it. She lives out the rest of her days in relative obscurity, far from the intrigues of court, far from her sister's rise and eventually her fall. There's something haunting about that. When Anne is imprisoned in the Tower, waiting for her execution, there's no record of Mary visiting. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she'd seen enough of the crown's poison to know when to stay away. And yet, in the end, Mary survives quietly, completely. She dies in 1543 at around 43 years old. No grand funeral, no monuments, just a footnote in the family record. And still her blood continues in the veins of the powerful. Her children rise, thrive, and become fixtures of Elizabeth and the court. Here's a fringe little twist for you. In the 20th century, historians confirm that Mary Boleyn is an ancestor of both Winston Churchill and Princess Diana, which means that through her, the modern British royal family descends from the forgotten Boleyn, not a Mary. You let that settle because it's kind of perfect, isn't it? The quiet one, the sidelined one, the other one. She outlives them all, not in drama, but in legacy. While Anne burns like a comet and disappears, Mary drifts softly through the generations, her influence hiding in plain sight. And that's the danger of underestimating the shadows. Sometimes they outlast the flame. You stand in the throne room just off to the side, barely breathing. It's not your place to make eye contact, but tonight everyone is stealing glances. The air is thick with something electric. More than ceremony, more than pageantry, because Anne Boleyn is no longer the king's mistress. She's the queen, and that changes everything. You've seen mistresses before, of course. Charming, clever, temporary. Their power always had an expiration date stamped silently on it. But Anne, she did what no mistress had done before. She rewrote the job description. She turned a flirtation into a war, seduction into reform, and desire into policy. She didn't just step into the Queen's shoes. She took them by force, broke the heels off, and strutted down the aisle of history, wearing them like weapons. It's 1533, and you're in the heart of Henry VIII's court, and everything is trembling. The king has defied the Pope. England is slipping from Rome's grasp, and Anne, pregnant and radiant in her coronation robes, is paraded through the streets of London as the new queen. The crowds are split. Some cheer either out of genuine loyalty or fear of being noticed, not cheering. Others scowl, whispering words like witch or usurper. Anne hears it all. She smiles anyway. But let's rewind, because the rise is just as brutal as the fall. Anne played her hand like a master for 7 years. 7. She refused to sleep with Henry. She gave him her mind, her charm and her company, but not her body. That was her greatest weapon. And the king, spoilt and used to instant gratification, was reduced to pacing, begging and writing letters filled with longing and terrible poetry. He offered her titles. She accepted the bequest out of Pembroke. He promised marriage. She waited. All while the wheels of Europe groaned and turned behind them. When he finally broke from Rome and declared himself head of the Church of England, it wasn't just about love. It was about legacy. He needed a son. Catherine of Aragon hadn't given him one. Anne, unspoiled and brilliant, was his next bet. And when she became pregnant before the wedding, it was now or never. Henry made it official. She became queen, and the whole kingdom held its breath. But you feel it, don't you? That tension in the air, the kind that tells you this won't end quietly. Anne may have reached the top, but it's a treacherous place. Every step forward is into thin air. She's surrounded by enemies, loyalist to Catherine, noble families bitter over her family's sudden rise, clerics who think she's damned England to heresy. Even the people who supported her are watching closely now, asking silently, can she deliver? And then the baby is born. It's a girl, Elizabeth. You hear the disappointment before it's even spoken aloud. Henry hides it poorly. Anne tries to smile to claim divine timing, but the court knows what's been gambled. A girl isn't good enough, not for all this chaos, not for a broken church and a humiliated queen cast aside. But Anne doesn't give up. She gets pregnant again and again. Miscarriages follow. One reportedly was a male child. Lost perhaps on the same day Henry begins flirting more openly with Jane Seymour, one of Anne's own ladies-in-waiting. You can feel the shift starting again, like a breeze before a storm. But here's what you don't expect. How deeply Anne believes in what she's doing. She isn't just clinging to power, she's reshaping England's very identity. She's a patron of reformers, a reader of banned texts, and a woman who dares to speak her opinions in front of bishops and scholars. She fights for charity, for education. She insists her daughter Elizabeth be raised not just as a princess, but as a ruler. She may have started as a mistress, but she ends up as a visionary, and that's why her enemies come for her so hard. The campaign to destroy Anne isn't subtle. It's not even especially clever. Rumours of adultery, treason and incest, even with her own brother George. You try not to gag as you hear the accusations. The same court that once applauded her every word now snickers at her downfall. Evidence is weak. Testimony is manipulated, but it doesn't matter. The verdict was decided before the trial began. You're there in the tower the night before her execution. She prays aloud, her voice steady. She speaks kindly of the king who signed her death warrant. And when she climbs the scaffold on May 19th, 1536, she does so in a dress of deep royal red. Her speech is graceful. She asks for mercy for the king. She kneels, the sword falls, it's over just like that. But is it? Because Anne's dream doesn't end with her death. Her daughter Elizabeth will one day rise to the throne and become one of the most iconic monarchs in British history. And everything Elizabeth becomes, sharp, decisive, learnt, powerful, feels like a living echo of her mother. Still, scholars bicker. Was Anne a victim or a villain? A martyr of patriarchy or a cunning manipulator who simply flew too close to the sun? Some say she was Henry's pawn, others say he was hers. But one thing they agree on: Anne Boleyn wasn't just another mistress. She changed the game. She made the job dangerous, ambitious, and potentially deadly. You exhaled slowly because this wasn't just court gossip. It was a full-on revolution, all sparked by a woman who dared to say no until it became a yes that changed the course of history. And as you walk back out into the echoing stone corridor, you realise something chilling. The most painful position a woman could hold in Tudor England wasn't queen. It was mistress. Just long enough to make the king break the world. You pull up a chair in the Great Hall, maybe a little too close to the fire where your gown starts to smell faintly of smoke and roasted meat. Around you, nobles murmur over goblets of wine, and beneath the polished chatter, there's always one question simmering. Was it love? Because when you look at the court of Henry VIII, the gifts, the letters, the long glances across banquets, you start to wonder whether all this royal romance was ever real or just survival with better outfits. Tonight you're sorting through the lies we call courtly love. The poems, the lockets, the sonnets penned by candlelight in a room you're technically not supposed to be in. At first glance, it all seems hopelessly romantic. But as you lean in closer, you realise nothing at Tudor court is done without calculation. And love is no exception. You see it start with young girls barely out of childhood, raised to believe that love and marriage are not intertwined. Love is a luxury, maybe, but marriage is politics, and so affection, real messy irrational love, has to find another outlet. That's where courtly love comes in. A game of pretend, a theatre of longing. The woman is placed on a pedestal, unreachable, adored from a distance. The man pines, writes poetry, and offers tokens of devotion. It's romantic in theory, but hollow in practice and dangerous because eventually someone steps over the line. A glance lasts a bit too long. A hand brushes against silk just a second too soon. Suddenly, it's not a game anymore. Suddenly someone's pregnant, or someone's ruined, or someone's mysteriously reassigned to a quiet countryside manor where no one ever sees them again. You watch Henry VIII play this game with terrifying ease. He knows the moves. The ring is gifted at a joust. The private masque is where he's dressed as a knight, and the chosen lady is rescued from her seat. It's staged, it's orchestrated, but it works. At least for a while, until it doesn't. Because when the king chooses you, it is no longer pretend. It's real, and it's terrifying. There are no clear rules for being the king's favourite. One day, you're handed a jewelled necklace. The next, your cousin is arrested for blinking too slowly near a Spanish ambassador. The same love that lifts you to the highest tower can also push you off it. Still, there are those women who think they can manage it, who want to. Women who study how to move across a room just so, who understands that one meaningful pause before a curtsy might matter more than 10 flattering words. Some write music, some embroider messages in their sleeves. You once saw a lady arrange her hair into a subtle H-shaped braid at a hunt. It worked. She was invited to dine with the king 3 nights later. And then there are the gifts. Oh, the gifts. You think your ex giving you a hoodie was meaningful? Try Try getting a castle or a sapphire-encrusted prayer book with your initials etched into the clasp. You touch one dusty and forgotten in a side gallery, and wonder how many hands it passed through before being locked away like a secret. These weren't just tokens of affection, they were markers of possession. You were claimed. If someone else tried to claim you, things could get ugly. Let's talk about the jewellery. Tudor jewellery didn't just sparkle, it spoke. Lovers exchanged rings with hidden inscriptions, often in Latin or French, heart pendants that opened to reveal miniature portraits, lockets that clicked shut with locks shaped like flames. And yes, men wore them too. Sometimes hiding a lover's image under their doublet close to the chest. Sounds romantic, right? Until you realise that if your rival wears the same one, it means the king's moved on and didn't even bother to change gifts. Now it's just a re-gifted betrayal hanging from your neck. Then there are the letters. If you're lucky enough to find yourself near the king's writing desk after midnight, you might catch him bent over parchment, pen scratching furiously as he tries to find new ways to say, "I'm obsessed with you. Please don't sleep with anyone else." Henry's love letters to Anne Boleyn still exist. Sleep now. Let yourself sink deeper into that perfect relaxation. Your eyelids are heavy. So heavy it would take too much effort to open them now. Your limbs feel pleasantly weighted, impossible to move even if you wanted to, which you don't. You just want to drift all the way down into deep, restful sleep. That's it. Just let go completely. The day is done. The work is finished. Nothing more required of you now except to rest, to renew, to dream perhaps of different possibilities, different worlds. But for now, just sleep deep and peaceful, easy and calm. Sleep now. Sleep well. Drifting deeper with each breath down and down into perfect, complete rest.